So, you could put your family relationships together, and of course, the more cataclysmic they are, the harder that's going to be. But boy, if you can put together a really fractured familial relationship, you've really got your act together. So it's a big challenge, but once you solve that problem, a lot of other problems look much easier than they did before. So, and then probably you want to have some friends, and hopefully ones that like you, and then so you kind of got to think through what that means. What friends do you want to have? People never ask themselves that question. They sort of take random friends, and I'm not saying that you should be arrogant and picky, but you should have something like a philosophy of friendship. And here's a good start. Pick people that you can tell good news to. Okay? And pick people that you can tell bad news to. And if you can tell them good news, then something good happened to you, and they're celebrating the fact that something good happened to you. And maybe you'll be able to return the favor, and that's part of what friendship is. And so that's a good thing, because they're not going to be jealous and bitter and spiteful and resentful and try to drag you into the cooking pot with them just because you've managed to clamber out, And then on the bad news front, well, you tell someone bad news, and it's time for them to shut the hell up and not tell you about how something happened to them 5 years ago that was even worse, and they offer you a certain amount of comfort, or at least they listen, which isn't nothing, that's for sure, and then you can return that favor at some point in the future as well, and isn't that a good deal, and so you want to have some friends, you want to figure out how often you want to see them and how you want to treat them, and what maybe needs to be straightened out on the friendship front, and then, you're going to have a job or a career, and you might want to figure out how you'd like that to go. I've had lots of people come up to me. This is something I love doing with my clients. I meet people after the shows, and people say, I had a pretty wretched job 3 years ago. Of course, I was drinking and doing all sorts of stupid things at the same time, and I was pretty bitter, but I decided I was going to, give it a shot for a while, and now I make 3 times the money, and, I have a job. I don't have a job, I have a career, and the horizon is kind of unlimited, and then we have a little joke, which is, well, that seems to be better, is that better? It's like, yeah, that's better. It's like, hey, man, there's a huge industrial organizational literature that shows that if you write down your goals for your life, so that's the vision of your life, there's nothing you can do that will make you more productive than doing that. Well, why? Well, you're working. Do you have a reason? And if the answer is no, well, you're not going to work very hard, are you? Because why would you toil away for no reward? And then you think, well, what's your reward? Well, what's the reward you want? How about you get to have the life you want? There's a good reward. Well, what is that? Well, I don't know. It's like, well, I'm not hiring you. You're all over the place. And any obstacle will stop you. And you have no hope. Because you actually experience hope in relationship to a goal. That's what hope is for. It's to show you that you're progressing towards a goal. No goal, no hope. The highest goal? Hey, the most hope? That'd be a good deal. Like you shouldn't aim so high that you got no chance of hitting it, because that's just arrogance. But like you do with a child, you say, well, here you are. You could easily hit that. It'd take a little work to hit that. Why don't you try hitting that? Maybe you got a 70% chance at it. 100%, that's too much. You already did that. 0? No, that's just futile. 70% or 55%, depending on how tough a game you want to play. Well, that's optimally challenging too, and it's optimally challenging because it moves you towards the goal, and it transforms you while you move. So that's a good deal. So intimate relationship, family, friends, job, education plan. You're probably interested in something. Find out what it is. Get good at it. Maybe it's you want to figure out how to wire your house. That's a good one. You want to know how to repair the plumbing. You don't want to know how to fix, what do you call that? Regrout bricks. It's not grout. Mortar. What do they call that when you refix the brick?
Tuck pointing.
What? Tuck pointing. She's done a lot of renovations, by the way. So, or maybe you could be a better carpenter, or you have abstract interests you want to read, or you got artistic interests, or, get better at something. Get good at something. Get really good at something. Then you learn how to get good at something. Then you can get good at some other things. That's a good deal. Consider the space of temptation in front of you. What are you doing stupid on the alcohol, drug, and promiscuity front that's screwing you up? And maybe that's quite a good time and you don't want to give it up, but if you had something better to do, maybe do that instead. That's the best way out of alcoholism, for example. Hardly anybody gets out of alcoholism without something approximating a religious transformation. That's been known even by extremely secular researchers for like 60 years. There's almost no alcohol treatment programs work. In fact, I don't think there's evidence that any of them work. They can get you through withdrawal, but almost everybody relapses. But what works? Well, lots of people quit on their own, but if you investigate that, it's because they have something like a spiritual transformation. And if you investigate that, you find out that they found something better to do. And in that, it's a crucial point, because especially if alcohol, for example, is a good drug for you, it relieves anxiety, it improves positive emotion, it makes people more social, and it decreases self-consciousness, so you can do impulsive, hedonic, foolish things and enjoy them in the moment. That's a pretty damn good deal, except that there's tomorrow. And so, why give that up? Especially if you have nothing. And the answer is, well, you won't give it up if you have nothing. But if you have something better to do, you might think, I'd rather do that. I like to drink. I drank a lot when I was a kid. I started drinking when I was like 13. I used to sit with my delinquent friends behind the fence in Fairview, Alberta, 800 miles north of the American border, 20 bloody below when it was warm in the winter. And you could still go outside at minus 20. It was minus 40, things got chilly. And we'd drink, vodka we'd put in the freezer and have a perfectly fine old time. And there was plenty of drinking up north, that's for sure. And I really liked it. I was very frequently the last person at the party. And why'd I quit? Well, I got married, and that was better. And I was writing this extremely difficult book, my first book, Maps of Meaning. And I just couldn't write that and do the research I was doing as a graduate school student. I couldn't do that and be hungover. It was one or the other. And it was interfering with my relationship with Tammy, too. Not tremendously, but I could see that it could easily be a problem. And there was no damn way I was going to be drunk with kids. Like, no. So I just stopped. And, that was a really good idea. But I wouldn't have stopped if I didn't have anything better to do. Like, why would I stop? It was a blast. I had a riot. So Dionysius, man, see, if you don't have another god, he's plenty of fun around the campfire, at 3 a.m. So, well, here's another thing you could consider. What responsibility have you adopted on the civic front? Or do you belong to a community of any sort? And if you don't, you're probably lonesome. And, a sports club, a businessman's club, a chess club, a reading group. Those are pretty local. A neighborhood association. A political party. You wonder, how can those politicians be so... You can list the adjectives, after that. And the answer is, because the people who aren't like that aren't doing that. And maybe you're one of them. If you're so smart, why the hell aren't you shouldering your civic burden? You know, and you think, well, I'm cynical of politics. You know, I haven't got time for that. It's like, fair enough, but you're going to take what you can get then, aren't you? And then also you have zero, in this country, you have zero grounds for being cynical. And why do I say that? First of all, there isn't a better country, as far as I can tell. And, you know, and that's damning with faint praise, because I'm comparing you to other actual countries instead of who you could be. But as far as when you stack your countries up, you're at the top of a dismal pile. And so, so this is about as good as it gets. And then you have these political parties, and, you know, the less said about them, the better, you could say. But I know perfectly well, this is 100% true, that both political parties at every single level are dying for competent people. It's certainly the case that the Biden administration did not have enough competent people to fill the roles it had to fill. And that's not just a casual criticism. I know this. I've talked to people who tried to staff the positions. They know perfectly well that many of the people who are filling the positions aren't the people for the positions. So why are they there? It's like, well, they took what they had. So, and I'll tell you something else about being involved in a political party, and I know this to be true as well. If you join one and you work, if you're reliable and careful and, you know, willing to start at the entry place, you'll move so quick that it will traumatize you. Because you'll think, oh my God, you're kidding. I can move that far up that quickly, knowing how little I know? It's like, yeah. So you might want to think about that. You know, here's a rule. I didn't write this in my book. All abdicated responsibility is vacuumed up by tyrants and used against you. Right? So if you're not involved politically, then you're at the whim of those who are. And that's that.